Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I am Scott Mathias from NCEA, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A or chat windows. We will be monitoring the questions and will try to answer them all in the allotted time. After today's webinar, I will email everyone a link to the recording, as well as an online survey. Once you fill out the survey, a certificate of completion for the webinar will be emailed to you. Today's webinar, DEALS 2020, Survey of Catholic School Superintendents, is being led by Sister Dale McDonald, Vice President of Public Policy for NCEA, and Gerald Cattaro, Executive Director at the Center for Catholic School Leadership and Faith-Based Education. Before I turn it over to our presenter, let us begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father, we ask that you encourage the hearts of educators. Remind them that you have called them to serve you by leading and teaching children. Help them to sense your steadfast love, to see your new mercies daily, to be satisfied with the good you give them, and to be renewed by your redemptive love. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Sister Dale and Jerry, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to all who are joining us for this overview of the Diocesan Educational Administrative Leadership Survey, DEALS, short. This is the fifth report in what has become a longitudinal survey of the Catholic School Diocesan Leadership Office. And as you'll see later, there are different titles that are used to describe the person who is the chief responsible for Catholic education. But collectively in this study, we refer to all of them as superintendent. I've worked with Gerald Cattaro on these reports in a collaborative project between Fordham University, where he is has several roles, including the Catholic School Leadership Program and NCEA. So I participated in these studies as part of my role when I was the director of research at NCEA, but we have expanded that role. Two other people have taken it over, and I'm concentrating now solely on the public policy issues. So I'll have Jerry introduce himself, and then we'll get ready to begin.
Good afternoon. I'm Gerald Cattaro. I am a professor at Fordham University, the executive director of what we call the Catholic School Leadership and Faith-Based Education programs. We have a Ph.D. and also a master's degree program, specifically for content areas such as Catholic leadership. I also was chair of the department for 8 years. I've been at Fordham for more years than I like to say, about 30 years. I'm also a member of the new dicastery for culture and education at the Vatican. I have several publications and on about 4 editorial boards. Saying all that, my most prized possession is my senior card to get on the subways, because I get on there half price. So glad to be with you this afternoon, and always happy to work with Sister Dale on this project. Okay, this is the fifth time we've done this project, correct, Sister? Okay.
Okay, so here we go. So as I mentioned at the start, call it DEALS, which is an easy way to remember all of the various parts of the hard to pronounce survey, but it is the educational leadership that we have been studying. So while our book has a lot more information in it, these are the topics that we will look at today. Looking at the evolving role of the superintendent and some particular data about the superintendents dealing with their educational background, employment history, working conditions, compensation, roles, issues, and job satisfaction, and succession planning, and then the recommendations for the future. So in looking at this evolving position of the superintendent, I'll start with looking at the DEALS methodology, and then Jerry will do the other pieces. So the The methodology regarding deals is a statistical study to gather demographic information about the role and the persons who have the designated position of educational leader. And so this survey was sent just to them. If the position was vacant or there was an interim, we did not include that diocese in the survey. So the response, we had 164 out of 175, 138%, which 135 responses, 82%, which is terrific. That's the best response that we had. We kept it open a little longer than we did in previous surveys because this hit right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And a few other things superintendents had to deal with initially as we first launched this survey. So once they had settled into some routines in the response to COVID initially, we were able to remind superintendents, and we did get a great response. So a thank you to all the superintendents that were able to participate. And so what we will be looking at is some of the data that were received, and then the implications and some recommendations for the future. Jerry.
So a comprehensive study of Catholic schools cannot be done without understanding of the superintendent of schools. In most instances, you, the superintendents, are the eyes and ears of the bishop as you try to provide the educational support opportunities for children in your area. The history began with what was called the Department of Catholic Superintendents, and that began in 1935. It was predominantly clergy at that time, and it evolved into what we call case. So the position was developed in the 1880s following the Third Plenary Council of Baltimore, which in essence mandated, but really specifically didn't say that each parish had to erect a Catholic school, just that the ordinary of the diocese was obliged with the pastors to provide a Catholic education for the children in his diocese. The schools originally were supervised by religious congregation and boards of inspectors, which always included pastors and boards. The pastor's role included visitation and supervision of the schools, record keeping, curriculum, standardization, and of course, improving teacher and education pedagogy. They relied on the superintendent, at that time called the superintendent of schools. When attention required, the schools, with pastoral responsibilities, all of a sudden this position of superintendent was created to supervise the schools. By the mid-20s, the position evolved and was becoming more and more concerned with policy future planning. Again, initially, all of the superintendents were diocesan priests. Many of them served in the chancery, and also they served in parish with parish responsibilities. If you wish to get an in-depth study of the superintendency, I recommend Professor Augustine's work, entitled Leaders in Times of Trial and Errors of Expansion, and that surveys the superintendency from 1936 to 1971, which became a crucial time when we developed what's called CASE. Down. So what had happened in this transition to lay leadership, we saw that predominantly the superintendency were clergy. And if you look at the studies, they only allowed male religious to join the executive board of what that was called the Superintendent Association of Catholic Schools. It wasn't until 1971 when the women religious formed CORD, an association of directors of women religious schools, that they were invited into CASE. The first superintendent was in New Hampshire, and that person was Wilfrid Lassard from 1919 to 1932, followed by a lay superintendent in New Orleans. By 1967, we see that there's 4 men and 4 women religious began the transition from non-clerical to superintendents. By 1975, really the critical year was 1971. More women religious were added, and more more lay people became superintendents. This is an interesting figure that the number of women in positions kept accelerating, because now they allowed the women religious to be part of case, all right, until eventually there were 60, which evolved at 62% men. Look at the 2020 figures. We have now 49.4% are women and 54% are men. In the previous edition of deals, we had more women superintendents because the religious were still present in the superintendency. Okay, Dale.
Okay,
Oh yeah, the diocesan executive. Okay, how it evolved. All right, it evolved from being superintendents of schools to superintendents of education, called Secretary of Education, Directors of Faith Formation. So it's a hodgepodge of different titles and also different contexts in terms of what their responsibilities are. Okay. If we look at the structures, there are 3 major structures. First is the Vicar for Education or Secretary of Education. Vicar of Education is usually a member of the clergy. The Secretary of Education is usually a layperson or a religious, and they're part of the diocesan staff who represent the bishop. The interesting piece is that we evolved from when the superintendents first developed in the 1930s, where they were the actual delegate for the bishop. Now they represent the bishop. Okay. The superintendent of schools is also in most dioceses, I can't say all dioceses, am I correct, Dale, is a member of the diocesan staff and really responsible for the educational ministry of the Catholic schools in the diocese. The diocesan director of religious education is also a member of diocesan staff, and many times is also responsible for the catechetical ministry in the parish school programs.
this is a look at the superintendent profile, and you notice some significant changes from when it was first done back in 2001, where in 2001 we had 51% were lay and 49 religious, and we look today and it's now 95.5 and 4.5 lay to religious. So the system has changed in terms of the role of clergy and religious in leadership. And when we're talking here for religious, we're talking about sisters, brothers, priests, and deacons. The deacons are also included as religious. Women, going back to the 2 slides back, I guess, looking at the changes since the 70s, women were 60.1%. Today, they're 49.6%, and men have now risen to more than half. And men now are the dominant gender in terms of leadership. The current age of superintendents has shifted as well, that we're looking at, almost 15% who are over 65, and that, generally in terms of laity is close to retirement age, if not retirement age. There's been a large turnover in the number of superintendents in the upper brackets compared with earlier on, where we now, we have 5% of superintendents are under 35 years of age, and from 46 down 17%. So we're looking at a population that may be changing, with some increased speed when you're looking at those who are approaching the 65 years and then those who are over, so that the leadership is shifting definitely to a younger sector of the population. Looking at the education background, we see that the superintendents are well educated. A third hold doctoral degrees, and another third additional credits beyond the master's. And while 86 have majored in education for their highest degree, it's interesting to note that a significant number have not. And they come from other backgrounds, business, legal, social services, and have very little, if any, educational background. And that's an important piece to consider looking at, a system that is an education system and does require children to be educated. In Catholic education, the role of a superintendent must include the spiritual leadership of the schools. And so that raises some questions for us in terms of the preparation for that role, when so many have not attended a Catholic college or university, or have not completed. That's the 80s. That's the looking here, the 56.8 who have degrees from public or private institutions, and then less than half have done a little more than half have completed some coursework in Catholic theological and religious studies. So, given the rapid shifts in academic preparation and looking at the changes in theological preparation from 20, 30 years ago, there are some issues that we need to pay more attention to as we're going forward. And then 37.6 have completed some coursework in Catholic school leadership. The important piece to keep in mind, those particular programs at many of the universities who belong to NCEA as the CHESS group, that Catholic Higher Ed Assisting Catholic Schools, they offer preparation for leadership that's specifically designated for Catholic schools, not for public schools in general, which most of your, which all of your public universities would provide. So tenure in the current position, there are some interesting statistics here. When you look at the number, almost half have been in the position less than 4 years. Now, to us old timers, Jerry and myself and a few of the others who were present at the Catholic Leadership Summit, the superintendent's meeting this October, it was interesting to see how many new people there were. And another aside, they were also a lot younger than we were, or appeared to be. So the, the position, has been trending downward in terms of age, which is fine. It's just an observation. The projected continuation of service in the position is interesting, since we have more than half say that they are going to be there less than 5 years. And that has some impact on the next bullet point below, willingness to relocate for another superintendent position. Only 40% said yes, they would be willing to bring their experience to another superintendent's position. We asked about the factors that would influence that. So family needs was first, need for a greater challenge was the second highest, and then relationship with their supervisor and their bishop. We just asked, was it a relationship? We didn't ask, was it positive or negative? So we're not sure what that really relates to in terms of whether they're happy in their position or they would look to switch to another person to whom they report. The employment history lets us see that, the pipeline for the superintendency continues to be through the Catholic school system as a principal or as an associate in a diocesan office. But there is a growing trend toward the selection of superintendents from other occupations, including public school leadership and from a business background. The working conditions, we looked at, do you have a contract? And it's almost 70% really said that they are at will with no contract, no written contract. And others who had a contract regarding the issues of employment were still considered at will. Direct reports, it's an interesting phenomenon. The secretary, the superintendent, or whatever title is used, is hired by the bishop. But yet less than half of them do report to this directly to the superintendent, to the bishop, rather. They report to someone else in the diocesan office structure. Okay, when we get to the salary and benefits, and before I mention some of the, I think it's important to know two things. There's much greater detail on this part of the survey in the book that we publish. But all data, were calculated from the number of respondents to the specific questions. And that's important because I'll note that only 52% provided financial data regarding their office budgets. We asked questions about the actual dollar amount, questions about how that funding is derived, and so on. So a little more than half responded to that. When we asked about salaries, the superintendent's salary, a little more than 25% did not report that, left those sections blank. So the calculations are not out of the 100% of the total. So total who did respond, but the calculations are out of the number of response to the questions. So looking at the salary, and so let me just back up a second. So the working conditions we see here, this is just kind of a summary of, that ranges of salaries, which I'll show in a minute. The men earn more than women, particularly in the higher ranges. All superintendents said they received health insurance from the diocese, even though they had to make some contribution toward it. And almost all dioceses make provision for family health care coverage. And more than half provide some kind of a pension contribution or an IRA. So in summary, 80% earn more than $80,000 a year, with 1.64% earning less than $50,000. And that 1.6 is not stipends. We did not include stipend. Stipend is the amount of money that traditionally was paid to a member of a religious organization, not the priests, but the brothers and the sisters for their services, which was a nominal amount compared with the actual salary of someone in a comparable position. So the 1.64 comes from lay people, most likely, and we do not have, any narrative descriptives on this, most likely those who are in the job as part-time and have another diocesan position, or are full-time, but in a diocese that has a very small number of schools. Because we do have calculations in the total of compensation by size of diocese, number of schools, that kind of thing. And men earn more than women. Okay. So this is a look at the compensation history as we started to collect it. Interestingly, in the first couple of years, we thought 110,000 was the big number. And we see how that has changed over the years. And again, not all superintendents reported their salary, but from what we have, this is percentage of responses submitted. So this is important. Frequently, when I was doing the data for NCEA, I would get inquiries from dioceses looking at what's the range in my area, what's the going rate for a number of schools, and so on. So again, there are more details in the book, but this is just your national means on salary and compensation. Now Jerry will talk about some of the work conditions in terms of.
So there are two-factor motivations, either intrinsic or extrinsic motivations. If we look here, we look at the job satisfaction data, tells a story suggesting that perceptions of stresses and quality of life in the role of the superintendency may not line up with the actual experience of our superintendents. Although the stresses of the superintendency may be high and seem to exceed initial expectations of many of those serving in the role, job satisfaction also seems high when compared with other U.S. occupations and public school superintendents, or within roles in the education sector. Family and personal concerns in combination with decreased benefit packages and job security seem to rank high in the responses that we've had. So if we look at the data, we see that relationships are very important to our superintendents. First of all, the sense of vocation, okay, is really important to them. That's at all-time high. Their work with the school personnel, the relationships in their offices, okay, relationships with the principals, with the teachers, and support from colleagues and peers is very important. What they seem not so happy or somewhat happy with is really the professional development that they receive. Okay, many feel like their scope of influence is on the wane, especially as diocesan staff seems to be shrinking. Salary and benefits seem almost not at all happy with. Professional advancement the same, and of course they're not there for the prestige of the job. So I think these are interesting factors to consider, okay, when we are interviewing or we're asking people to assume so intrinsically people are motivated for the job of superintendent of Catholic schools. So if we look at factors contribute to occupational stress, scope of the job, it keeps to be evolving and keeps growing, and sometimes they're not able to identify what really the scope of the job is. Wherever you have 2 or 3 people, you have politics. So you have the politics of the actual church structures, because they're more scholars. So how do they reach? Sometimes they can't reach the bishop if they had to. All right, personnel issues, principals, and attracting principals seems to be one of the largest concerns that are stressful. Teachers, some of the superintendents. Okay, could you go back? All right. Teacher issues and union issues, okay, that balancing of family and ministry. If we notice that I think married, over 75% of the superintendents currently are married. That's large, okay? It's gone up from, like, I think we originally started the study 40-something%. So that balancing of family, ministry, and not being able to relocate becomes a stress. More and more as states develop mandates, and they're more and more the superintendents are dealing with these mandates, that's stress. And also parish school boards, because the parish school boards are not trained, all right? They look and they mimic the public school boards. So this seems to be a big stress for superintendents. Okay. Issues requiring diocesan personnel attention, okay? Leadership formation seems to rank amongst the highest. So how do they form people to be leaders in their Catholic schools? Okay, recruitment for principals, that's another big issue. Many of them are dealing with personnel issues. Also, to provide adequate professional development. Many of them depend on publishers for this, but they're not providing the adequate professional development, or they feel like this is a big issue for them. Okay, many of them were not, as Dale mentioned before, really trained in the spiritual aspect of the superintendency, and that's the articulation of the mission. More and more are spending their time on conflict resolution. So if we look at this, and that becomes legal issues. Government regulations, again, with the state mandates, seems to be an issue. Again, more of an issue with getting qualified principals than we're getting teachers. All right. What was interesting to me, knowing, I guess, coming from the Northeast, the school facilities wasn't a larger issue than it is than was demonstrated here, because many of our infrastructures were built in the 1930s and 1940s. All right. So, and also multicultural issues do not seem to be a major stress for this issue regarding the superintendents. I really would like to have a qualitative study on that. All right. Okay. Next. Okay. So what are the emerging issues since 2015? Immediately, okay, highlighted here. Okay, bullying. Bullying seems to be an issue after the pandemic. This is also an issue with public school educators currently. Students interacting with one another. But for us, the sexual orientation of students seems to be a very emerging issue for our superintendents. I just got back from the World Congress of Catholic Education held in Marseille. This did not even come up. Of the, I say, 600 delegates from around the world, the issue of sexual orientation of students did not raise a red flag at all. The other is gender identity of students. Again, that also didn't come up at the World Congress of Catholic Education, but seems to be a main issue for our superintendents, okay, as student-to-student abuse. The issue of sexual orientation of faculty, again, that's above 50%. So that's something that I think we have to have training in or deal with, all right? The gender identity of faculty isn't a major issue currently. We'll see as time progresses. Now, okay. So if we look at succession planning, who's going to follow us? I think, Dale, you sort of said there, when looking at the statistics, okay, many of our superintendents will phase out after 5 years from now. So the idea is who's going to follow us? Formal searches for superintendents, over 75% of the superintendents indicated, yes, we do have formal process for looking for superintendents. Very few hire outside consultants, so I guess it's mostly done in-house. 75% of our, this is a big figure, okay, indicated there's no formal orientation process by the diocese or even by the region for new superintendents, okay? Over 95%, no specialized program for new superintendents who has not worked in the Catholic school system. So they feel as though, especially in what Dale was discussing, in the area of the Catholic identity or the spirituality, they feel sort of neglected. I would say to look at the identity of Catholic schools, the new document issued by what was formerly the Congregation of Catholic Education, which places more emphasis on the superintendent, or they call the school leader, right, to also be the spiritual leader, especially in issues of Catholic identity. What is also interesting in this document is that bishops will now have to visit schools every 5 years. I will actually get into the school or their clergy representative, not their lay representative, or their clergy representative has to visit the school. So there's, I guess, in eyes of the Holy See, there seems to be, they're agreeing that the superintendents are not formally educated to go into a Catholic school in terms of its Catholic identity and evaluate. Dale?
Okay, so as we reviewed the statistical data that came in, we were able to draw some inferences from that. and determined that the challenge for Catholic education going forward involves addressing the needs of a lay-led system. By the time the deal survey is conducted again, we expect there will be no significant, if any, religious in that leadership position. So the lay leadership that has emerged, and this is really an important piece to make. The lay leadership that has emerged has done a great job of continuing the Catholic school system and has dispelled the myth that Catholic identity of the schools would be diminished if the religious were not there. Personally, I thank all of those lay leaders who have embraced the mission and have worked tirelessly to build it. And we've seen that over the years evolve into even greater leadership capability in proclaiming and supporting the mission of Catholic education. But from the data that we have seen in deals, there is some concern, as Jerry mentioned earlier, about the succession planning and the preparation of new leaders, especially those who have not been part of the Catholic school system, either as students or educational leaders. And that is a concern. Public education is different from public education. And unless we keep that as the focus in our hiring, we have some serious problems that will emerge. So these are some of the recommendations that we're going to make in terms of this system that has emerged and will continue to develop going forward. So in terms of faith formation and spiritual leadership, the biggest change is in the preparation of the leaders, teachers, as well as lay-led, as well as the leadership. And that is really in terms of the spiritual leadership and how the dioceses will support the laity as they assume these roles. Traditionally, the dioceses were not the primary formators, and now they're called to be. Previously, the religious orders of sisters, brothers, and priests that ran the schools for the dioceses or for the parishes did the preparation and mentoring of the new teachers and principals, some of whom then went on to become the diocesan leaders of education. The congregations provided the spiritual supports and the academic degrees for their members, and the congregations absorbed those costs. The oversight of the actual schools themselves, the instruction, the curriculum, the spirituality was made by congregational personnel to supervise and mentor those in the schools. All the orders had someone who was the education director or some similar titles. And as well as, observing the classes and working with the teachers and the principal. They also provided some professional development opportunities beyond the academic degrees. So in terms of the schools, the spirit of the school, or the spirit of the order, what we call the charism, did provide an esprit de corps and a spirituality for the schools. There was a similarity among schools that were run by different orders. And a lot of that was fostered by life in community, where all were engaged in the same work, and mentoring was provided among one another. Even much of the conversation at meals was focused on schools. So it was a system that was self-perpetuating. So the challenge today for dioceses is to find support and mentoring opportunities and the financial resources to make it happen for the laity and for those who, will become diocesan leaders. There are many opportunities for professional development that the title programs provide, but they can only be used for secular, neutral, non-ideological opportunities. So that spiritual leadership, is the responsibility of the dioceses, and they need to be challenged basically to take it seriously. So, going forward, academic leadership.
So thank you. If we look at academic leadership, superintendents make an enduring, lifelong professional commitment to every child's learning. In much the same way, the commitment to their own life learning remains very important. This has never been truer in recent years as we look at student achievement performance, which has been so predominant in the news. Okay. When questioned about the level of preparation for superintendent positions in the Catholic schools, many of the respondents felt they were prepared in the area of curriculum and instruction, with business and political advocacy receiving low ratings. What we are recommending are that they attend programs that have internship programs embedded in the diocesan office. So it's not just that they're, they have to look beyond the principalship. Look at graduate contextual programs. Those are the programs that Dale was referring to. It's interesting that about only 31% of the superintendents have attended specific programs in Catholic education. And I'll skip to the CHEST opportunities because there are about, I would say, 15 colleges and Catholic universities spread throughout the country that offer programs in Catholic school leadership. Some offer programs specific and just have cohorts of Catholic school emerging leaders. Others, unfortunately, because of the population, have programs that are hybrid, Catholic education included with public education. However, we see that the Catholic school superintendents are not supporting these programs. So issues with CHEST would be is how long do we maintain such programs and how long can we maintain such programs? Look at mentorship programs that might be provided by NCEA or mentorship programs in a region, in a Catholic school region, or an adoptive buddy program. The other is scholarship programs. Scholarships are available. Dale did mention Title II sometimes can support some academic programs. I know that they support our master's program in the New York area, working with the New York City Archdiocese and the Diocese of Brooklyn. But there are other scholarship programs, or look to donors to provide scholarship programs for academic leadership opportunities. The other are partnerships. So partnerships either with other dioceses network together, all right, to establish learning communities, especially smaller dioceses, or partnerships with universities. Our own university had a partnership with a local diocese where they would support the tuition of the students for 40%. We would provide 40%, and the student would pay 20%. Again, professional development programs, look toward them, especially those that you can participate with Entitled II. Professional conferences. This is where we learn to network with each other, and we learn what's new in pedagogy and in areas. Okay, I think professional conferences are important, even if they're on the regional level, and to support them. The leadership cycle. We should know that when we should always have a stable of leaders that we can depend upon, because many of our superintendents will be leaving the job within 2 or 3 years. So we should be looking towards up and coming school leaders, provide them with mentorship programs and opportunities to advance themselves in advanced degrees.
Then the next is the enculturation to the Catholic school system. As we see a trend toward leadership coming from other sectors, it's imperative that we reinforce the fact that Catholic education is different from public and private education and from business operations. While financial and management skills are important components of the superintendency, the job itself requires different skill sets to be the spiritual and pastoral leader. And while people may be very successful in other fields, transitioning to a Catholic milieu is not just by osmosis. And we see in the last couple of slides that in each of the dioceses, more than 3/4 of those responding didn't receive any formal diocesan orientation to their position. Just handing someone the keys and showing them where the desk is and expecting them to do a great job is wishful thinking, basically. Fewer than 20% in this survey indicated that there was a process for acclimating them to, we asked about sense of mission, understanding Catholic identity, spiritual leadership, diocesan office culture, Catholic school administration, financial management policies and procedures. No orientation in that regard at all. So, it's essential that the differences between Catholic school leadership and that of public school leadership or business be understood. And that Catholic school superintendents be given the professional development they need to be able to exercise leadership and feel comfortable with this pastoral and spiritual leadership dimensions of their position. That should be a non-negotiable. And this is especially important today, understanding the faith leader, as we're seeing more and more issues being part of what superintendents are facing, as well as principals, in terms of cultural issues that are impacting Catholic teaching, particularly regarding marriage, sexual orientation, gender identity, and religious liberty of their schools, as state and local mandates and even the federal government are issuing more and more directives that are being challenged by our own Catholic identity or challenging our own Catholic identity. It's important that leadership people know what they're supposed to be defending, why, and be able to do so comfortably. So that's a big challenge that we see having emerged more so in the last 5 years than it did in the previous surveys.
I just, if I may, Dale, if I just may in tandem add on to that. So if you really look at the doc, and again, I really recommend you reading The Identity of Catholic Schools for a Culture of Dialogue. Just to quote here is that leaders in Catholic schools have to be people who guarantee that the instruction and education be grounded in the principles of the Catholic faith and imparted by teachers of right doctrine and lifestyle. So I think that's important because it also quotes canon law, and how you deal with the issue pastorally is very important. So I think not only do our superintendents need training in canon law, training in identifying these issues, but also, as you go to the back of the document, how to deal with this pastorally, okay, in conjunction with the bishop. Again, the bishops will be required to visit their schools or have, quote, a presbyterial committee visit the schools. And you'll be tagging along as the superintendent. So you have to be knowledgeable. My comment. Next slide.
There. Financial security.
So if we look at this and we looked at over 75% of the superintendents are married, there's a change in terms of financial security. We're looking at contracts. Okay, Dale shared with you how many, most people do not have a contract. All right. We're looking at terms of employment and benefits. Okay, how long are the contracts? What benefits are provided to superintendents? Okay, insurance, majority have insurance, but what about paying into the insurance plan and the insurance of their families? More and more of the superintendents are looking into retirement. So what retirement incentives are provided for them? Support for financial development. Most budgets are shrinking. I mentioned before that superintendents should be attending professional conferences. That's how we expand ourselves. If you look at all the professions, that's what makes you a profession. Okay, the sharing of ideas. Unfortunately, there's still gender disparity. Okay, how do we provide equitable incentives and salaries? Also, networking. So can different dioceses network and transfer insurance plans, benefit plans? We could look at some of the networks of the religious congregations. Some of them are starting to do that with their lay employees. So you have the Severian Brothers, or you have the Christian Brothers. They might network, and they might network also their financial security packages.
So that brings us to the end of this presentation. The contact information for us is present there, and I'll stop screen sharing now. Further information is available. I can never manage to show that correctly, but this is the publication that's offered through NCEA. If you want more details, I don't see any questions, or Scott, do you see anything more? I don't see anything in the chat box either. So if anyone has a question,
no.
would you kind of type it in now? There are no open questions either.
Right, you can just drop that into the Q&A, which is at the bottom of the Zoom window.
No one seems to be typing. So we thank you for your participation. We encourage you the next time the survey comes out in 2025 to please respond. Okay, we have a question. Thanks for the good work. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. They're retired superintendents. That's from Diane. Thank you, Diane, one of our great superintendents who retired a couple of years ago. That's something we should bring to I'll bring that to Karen Barreras, and who's dealing with the superintendents, and find a way we can do that. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
For the comment.
And to incorporate them.
Yes.
In the programs.
Okay, we have another question. No, okay. Those are the two we answered. Okay, well then, if there are no further questions, I think we can wrap this up. So again, thank you for your time and attention, and Happy New Year to all of you. May it be a healthy and prosperous new year for all. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.